The question today is, where do I go for genealogical help? And we're going to cover some places you can go in person and some places where you can get online and a few other places. So this is a kind of a general overview of every place that I could think of that you might want to check to see what kind of help you could get. The important thing is to understand that when you're faced with the reality of doing genealogical research, you might well feel lost and all alone in the world. Genealogy has not been known as a team sport. It's not a competitive sport. It's not reported in the sports page. Most people, when they begin to get interested in genealogy and their family history and finding their place where they came from, they might go to an ad. They might look at one of Ancestry's ads or one of the people who are prominent. But really, it's helpful to know that there are places locally around the world, probably close to wherever you live, that you can get help. And so we're going to go and explore those. So we're going to answer the questions: where do you start? Where can you go for help? And who can you talk to? If you start with yourself and your immediate family and record as much information you can. Now, a lot of people end up with that. In other words, once they get into their immediate family and their grandparents, they pretty well stay there and write family histories and stories and collect photographs and make all of that information can be almost endless. But the issue is, when you have a question, where do you go? So let's kind of explore some of the different places. And I would start with finding a family history center or a family search affiliate library, like the Brigham Young University Family History Library in Provo, Utah. Well, all those little blue and red spots around, the red spots are libraries in different parts of the world, and the blue spots are family history centers or family history libraries. Now, you might look at that and say, well, wait a minute, BYU is a library and it's not on there. And the answer is, well, Brigham Young University Library is not a family search library or a family search center. It was, in fact, the original Family History Center in 1962, but the library was taken over by the university, and it is part of the Brigham Young University and not necessarily a part of Family Search directly. Although all of the volunteer missionaries who work at the BYU Family History Library are basically connected to Family Search. You can go in here in this map, and there's the link down at the bottom, but you can find it by just saying Family History Center and search for Family History Centers online. And it will bring up this map link, and you can then zoom in and look at all the places. And you'll find that there are just lots and lots of family history centers around the world. Even if you were to live someplace like the middle of Australia or out in Africa, you'd still find family history centers. They may not be quite as convenient as they are in other parts of the world, but they are available. And most of them you can connect with either by telephone, or they have the address and you could send them a letter. BYU Family History Library has a virtual family history help desk. And if you look at this screenshot of the Family History Library's website, you'll see up in the corner, it says free classes and webinars. And obviously you must have located that, because if you're listening to this webinar, then you know at least where these webinars and classes are being taught. And then there's also virtual family history help. And if you click on this little button up here, Virtual Family History Help, it will take you directly to a link that will connect you with the Family History Library. So here's all of the different options for learning about things from the Family History Library directly. And as was mentioned, these webinars and classes that we have are uploaded after they're presented to the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. This is the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel, and you go to youtube.com and type in BYU Family History Library or Family History Library webinars, and you come to this page. Last check, we were getting close to 700 videos in all different topics. Those same videos are also available on BYU Family History Library website. So if you have some problem getting into YouTube, for example, you can see the same presentations on the BYU Family History Library website. What does this mean to start out with? Well, if you have a question, for example, there's the Family History Guide. One of the most recent webinars, classes that was presented was on the Family History Guide. So this will tell you about another resource that we'll talk about in just a minute. If you have to think through what you're doing and what your questions are. So if you say, how do I get started in doing family history, then there's all sorts of videos here that talk about getting started. If the question is something more complex, like how do I find my German ancestor who immigrated to the United States in 1860, that may require a little bit more information and quite a bit of learning to get to the point of answering that particular type of question. But when we're talking generally and on how to do things, like how to use the Family Search Wiki and other things like that, and if all those terms don't make sense to you, then all of these helps out there are the things that you're looking for that will answer those questions and start getting you into an understanding of what family search is all about and what family history is all about. Basically, though, you can use the YouTube. YouTube is a great place to go to get a lot of information. And even though the BYU Family History Library has their videos there, so do all the other major genealogical organizations out there. And there's literally thousands and probably tens of thousands of videos that talk about family history. Going on to YouTube, putting in the word genealogy, and you'll get probably a few thousand responses. And there's all sorts of topics. The more specifically you search, the more likely it is you'll find something that you're looking for. One of the biggest attractions for genealogists in general has always been, for many, many years, the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, Utah. The Family History Library in Salt Lake City is in a single location. It's the actual main library for the Family History Library. And it is located about 45 miles north of Provo, or you can look at the other way. We're located about 45 miles south of Salt Lake City. And the Family History Library has, over the years, I've participated in helping and had organized tours come to the library from various genealogical societies around the country and even from other countries that have come there specifically to do research and to work on things in the library. Some important things about that. We're thinking of the library, the Family History Library, as being in a specific place. Well, the reason why historically you would come to the library is because they had a vast collection of genealogical books. They had over 2.4 million rolls of microfilm that were available and many, many other resources. And over the last, probably around the last 10 or 15 years, almost everything that the library has been digitized. I mentioned that we have the virtual desk at BYU, and if you click on our link, you go directly to the virtual desk, and you're talking to one of the volunteers during the time that we're open, and then you can ask questions and work. The Family History Library in Salt Lake City has a research help link, and when you use the research help link, you can go get online consultations, and they're all 20 minutes long. And they're basically with people who have a specific knowledge about the area that you're interested in. And you really sign up for a specific time, make an appointment, and then you get the 20-minute consultation. You can do one of those a week for as long as you want to ask questions and get help from the people at the Family History Library in Salt Lake City. we are in a little bit different in BYU, and we're a little bit less structured, but we still have lots of very high-level expert people who can help you in different countries and different parts of the world, different languages, and all sorts of things. So here you have one-on-one help from people in the community, particularly who are knowledgeable and will help you to get through any particular questions you have. Whether you're starting out asking, well, what is family search and what do I do when I click? So those are the kinds of beginning questions. Or you could say, where can I find my ancestors in Italy or in France or in Germany or in England? The FamilySearch.org website itself has a learning center. And the learning center is, where do you start? And when you go into FamilySearch.org, they'll be getting started, all sorts of links and things. And as you get to that, they will give you some options here of lessons that have been presented by the Family History Library in Salt Lake. They're step-by-step lessons, and they'll get you introduced to all of the subjects and things that are available. For example, now I mentioned that the 20-minute consultations. Well, in those consultations, I've been on doing that now for more than a year. And most all of my consultations are in Spanish with people in Latin America. And lately I've been getting more in English, but they are also 100% almost interested in finding the origin of the immigrant and whether they had immigrated to the United States or immigrated to Mexico or to Ecuador or Colombia or Argentina or Uruguay. They're all exactly the same issue. There are things that are common that you may find that the question you're asking is something that many people know have asked the same question. And that's why these presentations and the things, the video presentations that are on YouTube and the learning centers are valuable because they realize and have been asked the question so many times, and they all do these videos and classes because of the specific questions that we've been asked. Now, one of the major things on the Family Search website that helps people get started or can advance at any level is the Family Search Research Wiki. And the Research Wiki has over 100,000 articles, and those articles are on every specific area of the world. And for instance, this one is Begin Your Genealogy Quest, and it begins how to get started, and then it will also go into more detail with more links to more places. And this is a very exhaustive list of genealogical resources all around the world, in almost every country of the world that has any kind of records that are available. One thing is that if you start to get involved in genealogy, you'll find out that there's a sizable genealogical community. It's worldwide. If you become more and more involved in genealogical research and doing genealogy, you will want to get involved with genealogical and historical societies and their conferences. When I started doing genealogy around 40 years ago, I was totally oblivious. I had no idea that there was anyone else in the world interested in genealogy. And I slowly began to realize that, yes, there was a genealogy library where I was living in Arizona, and that there were people there that could help me. And I did go to Salt Lake City to the Family History Library and got a little bit more help there. But over the years, I began to understand that there were a lot of people out there involved in genealogical research and people with extraordinary backgrounds. And these people were the ones that were out there teaching and helping. And so over the years, and by taking classes directly from Brigham Young University, is how I developed the background and knowledge that I can now share by going online and doing videos and classes. It was a long process, but it's a very rewarding process because there's a lot to learn. One of the statements that I've made over and over again is that if genealogy wasn't really difficult at times and very challenging, it probably wouldn't have kept my attention for 40 years. So you can go back to the Family Search Research Wiki, and for each state and each country, and even down to counties in the United States and counties in England and places like that, and find lists of genealogical societies, associations. My wife and I spent some time back in Annapolis, Maryland, digitizing records for Family Search at the Maryland State Archives. And while we were there, we joined the Anne Arundel County Genealogical Society and spent a year attending their meetings and meeting those people. And this was a very interesting and very rewarding experience. They had their own presentations and people there to help and could help you with doing research. So you just may find that to be another way of getting genealogical society. And here in Utah, there are a number of genealogical societies. This is one page, an example for the kind of information that you'll find about the genealogical societies. This is a list of the New York societies, with the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society, which is one of the oldest genealogical societies in the United States, and the New York Historical Society. Many of these have publications, they have papers, they have libraries, they have lots of huge organizations. For example, there's a website called AmericanAncestors.org, and it's part of the New England Historic Genealogical Society. And that genealogical society is headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts, and has a huge library of resources for all of the New England states and even outside of New England. Another in Massachusetts is the Mayflower Society, or the Mayflower Passengers, and it also has a library. And these are organizations that you join, and obviously they have a charge sometimes to join. But if you have the interest in these specific areas, then these societies can provide you with a tremendous amount of information. Now, we can jump out to some of the other larger websites, and I use this one as an example. myheritage.com is a huge program across the world, and they're headquartered in Israel and primarily focused on Europe. But a lot of people's ancestors came from Europe, and this is a place where you would go to get a lot more information about some of your European ancestors and connect with them. And this website, education.myheritage.com, it was started quite recently, about 3 years ago, actually. And it has been the recipient of literally hundreds of articles and instructional material on genealogy. Likewise, you have a huge amount of information on YouTube from MyHeritage and from Ancestry. When you learn about these large companies that are online and have billions and billions of records, then you begin to understand that not only do they have the billions and billions of records, but they also have courses and genealogy webinars. Many of them have Facebook pages with extensive amount of information. And so Facebook, you go into Facebook and look for genealogy, you'll find a huge number of entries of people and articles and educational things. It seems like, as I said, a little bit more than overwhelming at the beginning, because as you get into it, you find out that there are just literally hundreds, if not thousands of these places to go. And don't forget that there are a lot of books on both paper and online. FamilySearch.org website has over 500,000 digitized books. And those are completely usable, except for the ones that are in copyright, and then they're restricted. But it's always a good idea when you look for a book online to go look, if you find it on the website and somebody says it's not available online because it's copyrighted, then go look for it again. Put it into a Google search, look for the book. It's very possible that someone has the book and it's able to, in a sense, check the book out One of the biggest sources for this is a website called archive.org, archive.org. They have over 34 million completely digitized and indexed books. So totally searchable. So there's just so many resources out there. Whenever I get going into a research project, I just simply have to stop periodically and think, okay, now where else haven't I looked? And when I do that, I basically keep opening up into more and more resources. And it seems like eventually, I always hear the question from people that they've looked everywhere. And that comment's been made so many times. And my answer is, don't say that to me, because you're not that old and you haven't spent that much time doing genealogy to look everywhere. And so we just start again at looking at all of the other resources that are available. Right here is one of the biggest events, or the biggest event in the genealogical world. And that is the RootsTech conference that's held. Because of the pandemic that occurred, the conference, which had always been in person for over 10 years, was transformed into an all online virtual conference for free. Previously, it was rather expensive to travel to Salt Lake and live there for a week and go to the conference, had to be registered and pay for registration. And then when it was transformed into a virtual conference, it was free. Well, the number of people who attended the last conference before the pandemic were about between 20 and 30,000 people. That seems like quite a bit, but the minute that the conference went online, that number in 2020, when they were in 21, when they were virtual for the first time, there were over 1.5 million people who signed into and participated on the website. Because of that, they have kept all of this information online. And so there are more than 1,000 instructional articles from the very basic level to very, very advanced levels of genealogical research. And this is all on the RootsTech website. Well, then again, we had another one just recently that's usually in February, March. And we had the RootsTech for 2022. And 2022 RootsTech had millions and millions of people watch. I don't even know the total, but it's well over, probably over 1,500 to 2,000 videos on this website that you can watch. And all of this is free. You can just click on and watch this and learn as much as you want, and go back through it until you understand and get all of the information that you need. There's different tracks. We call them tracks on RootsTech. So you can have a track for getting started, a track for just about anything you can think of. English research, Spanish language research. They have dozens and dozens of languages here. The presentations are in those languages for the people in those countries. There's lots of others in English that are about those countries. So it's just a wealth of information here. If you want to just get involved with it, part of these are on YouTube. Part of the presentations are on YouTube, but the majority of them are simply here on the rootstech.org website. So you go to rootstech.org, and they'll be there for the rest of this year and into next year when they have another conference, and probably add another few thousand presentations from around the world.